Your Excellency, President Maithripala Sirisena, Honorable Finance Minister Ravi Karunanayake, very distinguished persons on the podium, distinguished invitees, friends, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first say what a great privilege it is to be here with you. I thank the Ceylon Chamber for inviting me. I must also at the outset thank my colleagues in the Central Bank for helping me to put together this PowerPoint presentation. What I want to try to, the key kind of message I want to try to deliver today is that the country seems to be on the cusp, seems to be making some headway towards putting in place conditions for sustained growth and development. Not grasping for quick fixes and sugar highs, boom and bust cycles of the sort we've seen in the past, but trying to create a foundation of strong macroeconomic fundamentals and a clear plan to go ahead. Now, why do I say that? I'm encouraged, even more encouraged by what I heard this morning, because both His Excellency the President and the Honorable Finance Minister stated very clearly that they recognize that fiscal consolidation has to be of the highest priority. If you look back at the last 30 years, that has been the main source of instability in the system. So if we're able to crack that, we can create the kind of foundation that's necessary for the private sector to invest, create jobs, and thrive. So that was a big plus. So that's one part of the story. The second part of the story is that in the next few weeks, the Prime Minister is expected to set out his 5-year plan. So a combination of sound macroeconomic management, with fiscal consolidation having to be at the heart of it, and clear direction, which I'm fairly confident will be set out by the Prime Minister. I think those of you in the private sector will have a framework which can encourage you to recalibrate your risk appetite and to commit yourself to investing in the future of this country in a much more aggressive way. Okay, let me get on to my presentation. And here it's in two parts. The first part is really trying to give you a sense of what the real economy is, what it has been doing over the last 5 years. And then the second part is about what the vision is for the future. So the first slide is about growth. Now the headline figure is more encouraging than the reality, because in the last 5 years the economy has grown by 6.1%. But if you look down at the notes at the bottom, it has averaged only 4.3% in 2013 to 2015. So what is the key message that has come out of that? In the period immediately after the war, we had a set of unsustainable macroeconomic policies which created a sugar high. We got 8% plus growth for 2 years, but from day one it was unsustainable. And so by 2012, we had to introduce a fairly aggressive package of stabilization. And since then, the economy has slowed down. So why hasn't the economy got back up to 7 and 8%? It's because while we have done the stabilization in 2012, and we've had more modest packages of stabilization since then to keep things on track, we haven't done enough structural reform to increase or to strengthen the growth framework. So that's really the key message from this. Really, you can create a sugar high and get 8%. But if you want to sustain it, you've got to have you have to strengthen the growth framework with some structural reforms as well. Now this is just showing you what has happened to per capita GDP. It's now almost 4,000. There's been a steady increase. Now this compares our per capita growth with selected countries in Asia. You see we do better than the countries in South Asia, not quite as well as the countries in East and Southeast Asia. But this is over the last 5 years. If you look at the period since independence, We were second to Japan on most indicators at the time of independence. We've fallen well behind several countries since then. So we need to ask ourselves why that has happened. And as my presentation goes on, I hope you have some better understanding of why that is. Here, on poverty, Sri Lanka, of course, has had an excellent record of social development, and our poverty levels are pretty good. If you look in terms of international comparisons, there you see what our poverty headcount ratio is, using different thresholds, different poverty lines, and we do okay. Again, there is of course this dominance of the Western province in the economy. It is getting less, and some of the government's development programs, which I will refer to later, will give you an indication that the government is conscious of this and is trying to, through its area development plans, have more balanced development. So these are some of the elements one needs for macroeconomic stability, which will create the conditions for growth. So let me take one of each of those in turn. The positive thing is that we've had single-digit inflation for a number of years now, and for several quarters we've had mid-single-digit level inflation. There's been a bit of an uptick in recent months, and that's one of the reasons why the Monetary Board and the Central Bank last week increased policy rates by 50 basis points. Now, our target is to maintain inflation at the mid-single-digit levels. But you must be conscious that the average inflation, we are living in a deflationary world, and the average inflation for Asia is 2.5%. So what we are targeting as our objective is double that, pretty much, 5% of 5%. So why do we say we're going for 5%? We say we're going for 5% because the conditions in our economy is such that if we go for lower inflation, we will squeeze growth too much. We will squeeze growth out of the economy because our growth framework is not robust enough to have such low levels of inflation. But what is the consequence of having a targeted 5% inflation when, say, a lot of our competitors in East and Southeast Asia are having low inflation? Means that there is a pressure on competitiveness. That puts a high premium on increasing productivity. If we are to remain competitive, we have to increase productivity and or depreciate the currency. Clearly there are drawbacks associated with depreciating the currency. So we need a big productivity drive, and if necessary, the central bank stands ready to support competitiveness with the exchange rate, but a far more sustainable way of making up for this loss of competitiveness is through increased productivity. The unemployment rate, again, is encouragingly low, but a couple of caveats. Over the last 10 years, we created 400,000 jobs in the public service. Clearly, that's not going to be possible in the next 10 years because there's a lack of fiscal space. So those jobs have to be created by the private sector, and the conditions have to be created for the private sector to invest and create these jobs. Also, we have 1.8 million temporary migrants. Now, of course, there are some of the countries which have geopolitical risks, but we also need to ask ourselves the question that particularly for our women who go for unskilled jobs, whether that is the option that we should be presenting them as a country. We should be creating other jobs which will keep them here, keep them with their families, and address some of the social issues which are associated with the migration we have now. I'm not going to say much about fiscal consolidation because both His Excellency and the Finance Minister have spoken. They've committed themselves to this, and I think if we can stay on track, that, as I said, this has been the main source of instability in the system. If we can crack this, we'll go a long way towards creating the conditions for sustained growth and employment generation. And also, I mean, I think I've been part of the CCC committee for a couple of years. Our concern has been lack of consistency and predictability in the policy framework for some years. That problem also, if you look at it carefully, a lot of the volatility in policy is driven by the government budget. When the government is constrained for resources, it has to do all kinds of mid-course corrections all along. It has to impose cessors, taxes, tariffs, all kinds of things to address the revenue shortfall as it goes along. And that's what creates volatility in the policy framework. Equally, the large budget deficit creates excess demand that leaks into imports. And when the balance of payments comes under pressure, again the government has, so these two cash flows, the budget and the balance of payments, when they're under trouble, when they're in difficulty, and usually it is due to the excess demand pumped in by the budget, then the government is constantly having to recalibrate its policies, and that creates the uncertainty that you see in the policies. And so if you can do away with that fiscal challenge, you go a long way towards addressing the volatility. And again, so it's very encouraging, both His Excellency and the Finance Minister expressed the view that they are very committed to addressing that problem. This is arguably the most important slide in this presentation. If you just have a look at particularly the last column, it's exports as a percentage of GDP. That's only goods. Ours is 12.8. You can see what the other countries have achieved. Because with a market of 20 million people, there is no way you can sustain growth of 7, 8 or more % without having a far, far better export performance. So that's an absolute necessity. We have to improve our export performance, and if one has a more stable macroeconomic environment and more stable policy framework, then the conditions will be created for you to do that. But you yourselves have to recalibrate your risk. You have to make an assessment. Is the macro environment on its way up? Is there a clear policy direction? Is it time for us to recalibrate our risk profile? Can we do more? Can we have a longer time horizon in terms of our investment decisions? Those are things I think it's timely now for the private sector in Sri Lanka to address. So, I mean, these, all of you know, we need to have greater product and market diversification. Tourism industry, and this is a good news story. It's a relatively low-hanging fruit. Already we are seeing results. India and China are the markets that are driving the growth, but clearly we want an increase in our daily spend. The inventory is improving, high-quality inventory is coming on stream. So this is a sector which has great potential and we need to keep going. Remittances, here again, crucial in terms of the present scenario. And what's encouraging is that after a slight decline last year, in the first 5 months, first half of this year, we are a little ahead of last year. So they seem to be holding up pretty well. But as I said, and we've been seeing the change in the composition of the skills of people going out, which is encouraging. But really, we need to be creating conditions for these people to be working in Sri Lanka. Investment, as a percent of GDP, is 30% last year. We need about 35%. Now, the government there's this saving on the part of the government. The government current account is about 1.5–2% of GDP. If we get rid of that, then we have 2% added to domestic savings. That increases domestic resource mobilization. And we need another 3–4% of GDP by way of non-debt creating inflows in the form of FDI. Another message out of this slide is, you can see in 2012 we had 39.1% of GDP. I mean, that is very impressive if we can get anywhere there. Then you have to ask the question, why is it? Why wasn't that reflected in growth? Why did we see that kind of investment leading to sustained higher growth in subsequent years? And the answer is that seems to indicate that the quality of that investment was not very good. So we've invested, but the quality wasn't good. So the message there is, it's not enough just to get up to 35% or 40% of it. GDP as investment. That investment has to be good. One has to screen the investment, make sure you get a decent return. Again, FDI is critical. This last year was disappointing. The first quarter of this year is very disappointing, but I do know from my previous incarnation in the Ministry of Development Strategy and International Trade that the second half is going to be better. We're going to end up with about $1 billion, but that is certainly not enough. You can look at the bottom, the graph at the bottom. Way up top is Singapore. You know, they've got, well, what about 8% of GDP, almost 10% of GDP. All the other countries are around 3–5% of GDP. The best we've done is about 1.5%. So that's what we need to do. We need to get it up. The sovereign bond issue, we put this up here because in the coming years, for the next 5–6 years, the Sri Lanka government is going to have to go to international capital markets to raise money because of the backlog of debt repayments, backlog of debt and the repayments that are coming upon that. For us to meet our repayments and have resources for foreign exchange, sufficient foreign exchange, for our needs, for our other needs, means that we would have to go to markets. So it's very important that we have access, and what was encouraging was that 3–4 weeks ago, the dual trans issue was 4.5 times oversubscribed, and the interest rate, though higher than sometimes in the past, because international conditions have changed, was lower than what we originally anticipated. On both, we had a dual tranche of 500 million over 5–5.5 years and $1 billion over 10 years. On both those, the eventual weighted average interest rate was about 25–30 basis points less than we originally anticipated, which was encouraging. Now, what is very important is that we create conditions in terms of the domestic economy whereby investors have confidence in us. This was another reason why the Monetary Board increased interest rates last year. We wanted to give a very clear signal that in future we will have forward-looking policies which will ensure that the macroeconomic conditions will be stable, and therefore that we build up a track record of such policy making so that when the country has to go to international markets for the next 5–6 years, they can go there and get the money they require at a cost that is as less as it could be. Gross official reserves, they went down. We've now, with the bond money, syndicated loan. Also, what's been interesting is that in the last few couple of months, money has started coming back. Foreign money has started coming back into government securities. Before that, for a period, there was an outflow, and we see a change. And I think an important determinant of that change is the fact that the government has committed itself to a program which the IMF has supported. The rupee, this is the trend in the rupee. I'm going to go quite fast. Here, domestic credit. This is one of the reasons, important reasons again, why we increased interest rates last week. Private sector credit is growing at about 28%. Ideally, it should be about 20%. So we would like to see it ease off a bit. So that was one of the reasons for increasing the interest rate. And another thing that is of concern is at the bottom right, if you look at personal loans and advances, they from, you know, it was going up at a very high pace. In March, it went up by 31%. So that private sector credit, consumption credit, that's something we needed to discourage. Now, this is what we've seen in interest rates. You see there again a tightening cycle since the beginning of the year. There was an increase in the statutory reserve ratio and a 50 basis point increase in January and February, and we've again increased because we think there is a bit of overheating in the economy, but the growth impulses in the economy are strong enough for us to achieve 5–5.5% growth while sustaining the kind of monetary stance that we have. One of the reasons we also increased the interest rate is that the government has done excellently in terms of its fiscal outcome for the first 6 months. But the court cases related to VAT has caused some uncertainty, and monetary policy has to lean against that. Domestic capital market, if you look at the bar chart at the bottom, market cap is 25%. That is the same as Vietnam, which is actually a socialist economy. So, in an economy which says it's not at all capitalist, we are at the same level as that. So, if you look at the other two numbers, we need to get market cap up certainly to 30–40%. This is the vision, and these are the key drivers. All this you know, fiscal side you've seen. Let me just say something about trade policy. This is crucial. One is there's a lot of kind of pipe cleaning going on. There's a national trade policy framework that's being developed. There is trade facilitation is being improved. But really the centerpiece of trade policy, as the finance minister mentioned, are these trade agreements. The various trade agreements that he mentioned, by this time next year, there is a strong probability that the government of Sri Lanka will be able to say that this country has preferential access to a market of 3 billion people. India, China, Pakistan, and the GSP Plus with Europe and Singapore. You bring all that together, that in a way is the USP that we will have. And not only will that create a much larger market for our domestic exporters, but probably the bigger prize is that we'll be able to show this to our foreign investors to say that to leverage the trade investment nexus. And the other part, the other leg of this, as the new development strategy is, or at least the new growth model has to be FDI. So it's a private sector driven strategy this government is driving, and the two key pillars are exports and FDI. Let me finish. There are a couple of more slides which you can, I think the organizers will make this available to you. You can refer to it in your own time. But what is the key message that I want to leave with you? And I hope I can take 2–3 minutes to do that quickly. Okay. One is that the government, A, has a stabilization underway. B, it has these ambitious area development plans for the western region, Megapolis, Hambantota, where China is going to come in a very major way. Singapore is going to do a master plan for Trincomalee, and they will also lead in terms of trying to mobilize investment in that area. And India has shown interest in an industrial zone around there. Japan is interested in Trincomalee, is also interested. It's doing a master plan for Kandy. So you have all these activities going on. So that in 2–3 years' time, the government is going to be able to leverage its strong G2G relations with China, Japan, with India, with Singapore, with Korea, to get investment in India. Because in those countries, governments are able to encourage their companies to go and invest. And that process seems to be taking place. So there's going to be a large amount of investment that's going to come into this country. But that is going to take 2–3 years. In those next couple of years, I think the main responsibility is going to lie with the people in this room and others in the private sector in this country. So you've got to take a call. Are the conditions being created now for you to really up your game? Because the animation, the activation of the animal spirits of the Sri Lankan private sector is crucial if we are to get the economy going in the next year or two, while these other development plans come to fruition. So that is really the sequence. Conditions, macro conditions are improving, then a clearer direction in terms of where the economy is going. Hopefully that will encourage you to invest and get into a much higher level of economic activity, and in a year or two we will see all these big development programs bearing fruit. Hopefully that's going to take the country to a completely different level. Thank you.